The first cry broke the silence of the mental hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning. The nurse on duty, Valentina Sergeevna, dropped a cup of cooled tea directly on the fresh entries in the reception log. 27 years of working within these walls had taught her to distinguish between the ordinary moans of her patients at night and something truly terrifying. This was the second type of scream, the one that makes the blood freeze in the veins. She rushed down the corridor to room number 17, where the girl had been placed 3 days before. The same girl who was brought by the police from the forest near Mozhaisk, who looked at everyone with empty eyes and was silent like a stone. The keys jingled in the nurse's shaking hands as she unlocked the door. The picture inside made her recoil. The girl sat on the floor in the middle of a perfectly drawn circle. The circle was drawn with blood, the child's own blood, which oozed from the fingernails' wrists. But this was not what shocked Valentina Sergeevna the most. The girl spoke. For the first time in 3 days, her lips moved, spewing a stream of strange, guttural sounds that were unlike any language the nurse had heard in her life. The words flowed in a continuous stream, rhythmically, like a prayer or an incantation. "Child, what are you doing?" Valentina whispered, but the girl did not even look up at her. Her gaze was fixed on the void, through the walls, through time, to some point invisible to ordinary people. His lips continued to move, spitting out foreign words, and there was something ancient, primitive, chthonic in them. By the time the doctor on duty, Igor Pavlovich Sokolov, ran up with 2 orderlies, the girl had already lost consciousness. Her small body lay in the center of the bloody circle, and her lips were still moving silently, as if the words continued to flow even without her conscious participation. "Write down everything," she says, the doctor ordered, applying tourniquets to her slashed wrists. "Every sound. And call Professor Markelov. Right away." Professor Ilya Davidovich Markelov arrived 40 minutes later, disheveled, in a crumpled shirt, but with eyes burning with curiosity. A 70-year-old linguist, a specialist in dead languages, he agreed to come only after Sokolov sent him an audio recording of the girl's mumbling by email. "Show it to me," he demanded, without even saying hello. The girl was lying in a hospital bed, pale as wax, with her hands bandaged. She looked 11 or 12, maybe a little younger, exhaustion distorting her features. Dark hair fell in matted braids on the pillow, freckles on the nose. An ordinary girl, if not for these eyes. Even when closed, they seemed wrong, too deep, too knowledgeable for a child's face. "Tell me everything from the very beginning." Markelov sank into a chair by the bed and took out a dictaphone. "Where did you find it? Under what circumstances?" Sokolov leafed through a thin folder with documents. 4 days ago, on the 23rd of October, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a group of mushroom pickers stumbled upon it in the forest 12 kilometers from Mozhaisk. She was sitting on a fallen tree, wearing only a torn shirt, barefoot. The temperature was about 0 degrees, but the child did not tremble. He did not react to others at all. Mushroom pickers called the police. The police, an ambulance. The hospital found a medium degree of exhaustion, multiple scratches and abrasions, traces of insect bites, but nothing that would indicate violence or abuse. And what about her personality? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There is no one like it in the database of missing children. The fingerprints did not match any of the cases. The DNA was sent for examination, but the results are not yet available. When she is asked what her name is, where she is from, what happened, she is silent. Or rather, she was silent until tonight. Show me that place in the forest. Professor, this has nothing to do with linguistics. Show me. Markelov repeated more firmly. If I'm right in my suspicions, this place is critically important. The section of the forest turned out to be unremarkable. Old birches, undergrowth, fallen leaves. The police had already removed the cordon 3 days ago. Markelov walked in circles, carefully studying the ground, while Sokolov smoked aside, shivering in the cold wind. Here, the linguist finally stopped. Do you see these stones? Sokolov approached. Indeed, there were several gray stones on the ground, clearly not located by chance. They formed an irregular circle with a diameter of 2 meters. They're just stones. No. Markelov squatted down and ran his fingers along the surface of one of the boulders. Look, do you see those notches? This is not natural erosion. These are traces of carving. Very old carvings. The symbols have almost been erased by time, but they are here. He took out a magnifying glass and a phone, began to photograph the stones from different angles. What do you see there? Sokolov took a nervous drag on his cigarette. I don't know for sure yet, but if my suspicions are correct. Doctor, tell me, have you ever heard of Venetic? About whom? Venetic, an ancient tribe that inhabited these territories in the first millennium BC. A Balto-Slavic group, presumably. Almost nothing remains of them. A few archaeological artifacts, mentions by Roman authors. And most importantly, we did not know their language. Until today. Sokolov threw away the cigarette, and stared at the professor. Do you mean that the girl speaks a language that is 3,000 years old? I mean, I heard phonemes and structures in that record that are not found in any modern or known ancient language of the region. But they show signs of an archaic Balto-Slavic grammar with an admixture of something else, something pre-Indo-European. Markelov stood up, shaking off his knees. We need to go back to the hospital. If she speaks again, I have to be there. The girl woke up at sunset. Markelov had been sitting by her bed for 3 hours, leafing through his notes and muttering something under his breath. When her eyelids fluttered and opened, he froze. The eyes were brown, perfectly ordinary brown eyes, but there was something so unchildish in them that the professor involuntarily moved away. The girl turned her head and looked directly at him. They were silent for a few seconds. Venas morasiatal, she said quietly. Markelov grew cold. He didn't understand the words, but the intonation was clear. It was a question. She was asking him something. I don't understand, he said slowly in Russian. Do you speak Russian? English? Deutsch? The girl frowned, clearly not recognizing any of the languages. Then her eyes fell on the notebook lying on the bedside table. Without asking permission, she reached out and picked up a pencil. The professor handed her a notebook. The hand moved confidently, drawing strange signs, not letters, not hieroglyphs, something in between. Angular lines, dots, curls. She wrote a whole page, then another. At last, she put down her pencil and looked at Markelov expectantly. He took the notebook with trembling hands. The writing was unfamiliar, but it had a sense of system, logic. These were not the scribbles of a mentally ill child. It was a real written language. Good God, he gasped. It's impossible. For the next 3 days, Markelov practically did not leave the hospital. He moved half of his library there, installed special equipment for recording speeches, and invited 2 colleagues from Moscow State University. The girl, whom the doctors began to call simply Anya for lack of a name, gradually made contact. She was drawing, gesturing, trying to explain something in her incomprehensible language. The breakthrough happened on the 4th day. Markelov brought an album with photographs of archaeological artifacts, fibulas, pots, jewelry found at the excavations of ancient settlements. Anya indifferently flipped through the pages until she came to a picture of a strange clay disc with embossed symbols. It was found in the Moscow region in the 19th century, dated approximately to the 7th or 8th century. The purpose is unknown. The girl froze. Her fingers trembled as they touched the photo. Then she began to speak quickly, choking on words, pointing to the symbols, to herself, drawing something in the air. Her voice was filled with fear mixed with despair. What does she say? Sokolov watched the scene from the threshold. Within a week, he had become accustomed to the professor's presence and his strange project. I'm not sure, but please wait. Markelov moved closer and turned on the recorder. Once again, girl. Slower. Anya took a deep breath, obviously trying to control herself, and began again. This time more slowly, carefully pronouncing each word. She pointed to the disc in the photo, then to herself. Then she circled everything around with her hand, the hospital room, the window, the world outside. Markelov feverishly took notes, checked something with his reference books, muttered to himself. At last he raised his head, and Sokolov saw that the old scientist's face was deathly pale. Professor, she says, God, I can't believe it. She says that this disc is a gate, portal, and that she went through him. From another time, there was silence. Somewhere in the corridor, a gurney squeaked. Someone laughed. The usual sounds of an ordinary psychiatric hospital of an ordinary Moscow day. Professor, Sokolov said slowly, do you understand how that sounds? I see. I understand that this is madness. But explain to me then, Doctor, how can a girl in the early 21st century know a language that has not been used for the last 2,500 years? A language that wasn't even fully deciphered because we just didn't have enough samples? How can she write in a script that is known only from a couple of fragments on ceramics? How? Sokolov could not find anything to answer. The next 2 weeks turned into a marathon of discovery and growing horror. Markelov attracted more specialists, archaeologists, historians, even a theoretical physicist from the Institute for Nuclear Research. Anya patiently answered questions drawn showed. Gradually, a picture was formed. She came from a tribe that lived on these lands at a time when there was neither Moscow, nor Russia, nor even Slavs in the modern sense. Its people possessed knowledge that modern science was only beginning to grope for. Knowledge about the nature of time, about the points of intersection of realities. Stone circles in the forest were not just ritual structures. They were time machines, created without electricity and computers, based on an understanding of the fundamental laws of the universe. But why? Markelov asked through the improvised system of communication that he and Anya had gradually developed, a mixture of her language, Russian, and drawings. Why did your people create this gate? Why send people into the future? Anya was silent for a long time. Then she took charcoal. They let her draw with charcoal on paper and began to draw. She painted people, villages, then soldiers, fire, death. She drew how her people fled from something, how the priests opened the gates, how the chosen ones left through them to preserve knowledge, language, culture. Who did you run from? Markelov whispered, looking at the gloomy drawings. Anya drew figures on horses with swords. Then I wrote the word in my language. The professor checked his notes for a long time until he found an approximate translation. Iron Men. She calls them Iron Men. He looked up. Scythians. It speaks of a Scythian invasion. This was in the 5th or 4th century BC. The Scythians really came to these lands, destroyed many settlements of local tribes. Physicist Andrei Vladimirovich Krestovsky, a young man of about 30 with eternally disheveled hair, doubted. But how? What kind of technology could allow a primitive tribe to manipulate space-time? To create a stable wormhole, you need energy comparable to the energy of a star. Maybe not energy, Markelov said thoughtfully. Maybe knowledge. Maybe they knew something about the structure of reality that we're just beginning to understand. Quantum entanglement, dark energy, strings. We give it different names, but the essence is the same. The universe is much stranger and more flexible than it seems. This is all very interesting as a theory, Sokolov interjected. But we have a practical problem. The girl begins to have convulsions. Every night, they are intensifying. I don't know what's going on with her, but her body rejects something, as if she couldn't exist here for long. Everyone looked at Anya. The girl sat on the bed, clasping her knees in her hands, and looked out the window at the autumn rain. She seemed so small, so lost. A child torn out of his time, abandoned for 2,500 years ahead, into a world where everything is alien. Language, clothes, food, even air. Ask her, Krestovsky said quietly. Ask what's going on. Maybe she knows. Markelov went to the bed and gently touched the girl's shoulder. She shuddered, turned around. The professor began to draw in their common notebook. He drew her, sleeping, shaking, drawing lines symbolizing convulsions. Then he looked at Anya inquiringly. She understood. She took a pencil and began to explain. Drawing after drawing formed history. The gate she had passed through was unidirectional. The path to the future was open, but the way back was not. Her body, her soul, something fundamental in her being, was connected with her time, with her era. The longer she stayed here, the stronger the rejection became. She's dying, Sokolov understood. She's slowly dying just because she's in the wrong time. How much? Markelov asked hoarsely. How much time does she have? Anya pointed with her fingers. 7. Then she circled the circle with her hand. Days. She had 7 days from the moment she passed through the gate. Today was the 15th day. Lord, Krestovsky clutched his head. We have to do something. There must be a way. Yes, Markelov pointed to Anya's new drawing. She says there's a way. We need to return to the gate, to the stone circle in the forest. There's a way back, but it is dangerous. Very dangerous. How dangerous? Anya drew for a long time, erased, and started again. The picture was terrible. The return passage through the gates required a sacrifice, not human, thank God, but a sacrifice of memory. The one who goes back forgets. He forgets everything, his name, his life, everyone he knew. He starts with a clean slate, as a baby in the body of a child or an adult. That's why she doesn't remember her name, Markelov guessed. She tried to come back. I went to the gate, tried to activate it, but something went wrong. The process began but did not end. She lost her memory, but she stayed here in our time. Can we try again? Sokolov looked at his watch. We have less than a day. Krestovsky walked around the ward. We need equipment. Sensors, cameras. We must record the process. This may be the greatest discovery in the history of mankind. This is the life of a child. Markelov cut him off abruptly. Your discoveries are secondary. They left for the forest at 4 in the morning. A small group, Markelov, Sokolov, Krestovsky, 2 physics students with equipment, and Anya, wrapped in a warm blanket, shivering with chills, despite the heater working in the car. Her skin was almost transparent. Dark circles lay under her eyes. Time was running out. The stone circle looked even darker in the pre-dawn darkness. Students placed devices, cameras, and directed searchlights. A cold light flooded the ancient stones, snatching the erased symbols on their surface from the darkness. Anya got out of the car, threw away the blanket. Underneath, she was dressed in a simple white shirt. She herself asked for something similar to the clothes of her people. Barefoot, thin, with her hair blowing in the wind, she looked like a ghost, like an echo of the past. She walked to the center of the circle and knelt. She stretched out her hands to the stones, and her lips twitched, pronouncing the words in her ancient language. Words of prayer, maybe, or spells. The line between religion and science was thin for her people. At first, nothing happened. Then one of the sensors beeped. Magnetic anomaly. One of the students muttered, looking at the laptop screen. It grows. It grows rapidly. The air inside the circle began flicker. There is no other word for it. Space swayed like ripples on water. Only instead of water, there was reality itself. Anya continued to speak, and her voice became louder and more confident. Gravitational fluctuations. The second student spoke confusedly, not taking his eyes off the instruments. It's impossible. The readings are off the charts. The stones began to glow. A dim, bluish glow emanated from ancient symbols, as if some internal source of energy had been incorporated into them. The light became brighter, and the distortion of space within the circle became stronger. And suddenly Markelov understood everything. "Stop," he shouted. "She can't get through. She doesn't remember words. She's lost her memory. She doesn't know how to open the gate properly." He rushed to the circle, but Krestovsky grabbed him by the arm. "Don't enter the field. We don't know what will happen, but she's going to die." Anya turned her head and looked at them. There was no fear in her eyes, only sadness, a deep, ancient sadness, incompatible with her young face. She knew. I always knew that it might not work, that she can get stuck between worlds, between times, in an eternal limbo. The glow reached its peak. The air inside the circle turned into a vortex of light and shadow. The gates were almost open, almost, and then Anya did something unexpected. She began to sing. Not words, not incantations, but a song. A simple children's song in her language. A melody so ancient that the very childhood of mankind could be heard in it. A lullaby, maybe, or a song that was sung at harvest festivals. Something human, warm, alive. The vortex within the circle trembled. The glow faltered, and then it began to fade. "No," Anya whispered in Russian. The first and last Russian word she uttered. "No, I don't." She fell face down, and the light went out completely. Sokolov and Markelov rushed to her, no longer paying attention to Krestovsky's shouts. They lifted up a small body, checked the pulse. It was weak, thread-like, but it was there. In the car, Sokolov commanded automatically, although everything inside him was cold. "Go to the hospital immediately." She had only a few hours left. They put Anya in the back seat. Markelov sat down next to him, holding her cold hand in his. The car took off, cutting through the morning fog. "Professor," whispered Sokolov without taking his eyes off the road, "what now?" "She will not be able to return. The gates did not open." "I don't know. I don't know." Anya lived until the evening. She spent her last hours in intensive care, hooked up to machines that struggled to keep her in this world, in this time. Markelov did not leave his bed. He held her hand and spoke in Russian, because he knew too few words in her language, but hoping that the intonation would convey the meaning. He told her that she was brave. that her people could disappear from history, their cities turned to dust, their names forgotten, but she, this nameless girl out of nowhere, proved that they existed, that they had a culture, a language, knowledge that modern science cannot replicate, that it changed everything. Anya opened her eyes for the last time at 7 o'clock in the evening. She looked at the old professor, at his tears, at the strange world around her, the world of the future, which could not accept her. Her lips moved. Markelov leaned closer. "The era," she whispered. "Thailandiarabel." Then her eyes closed, and the instruments beeped evenly, monotonously. Markelov did not let go of her hand until the nurses took him out of the intensive care unit by force. The following days turned into a nightmare of bureaucracy. The official cause of death is multiple organ failure of unknown etiology. The body of the unidentified child was to be sent to the morgue. Then, if no one showed up, to the city cemetery. An unnamed, useless grave. "No," Markelov said. "I'll pay for the funeral." "As it should be." Sokolov looked at him sympathetically. "Professor, you don't have to." "I know, but I will do it. It deserves more than a pit for beggars." Krestovsky and his team, meanwhile, analyzed data collected in the forest. The results were strange. The instruments recorded anomalies that did not fit into any existing physical theory. Space-time distortions, gravitational waves, bursts of energy of unknown nature. But without a living guide, without Anya, they were useless. The gates remained closed. "We could try again," Krestovsky suggested at a meeting a week after the girl's death. "Now we know it works. We could—" "What?" Markelov interrupted him abruptly. "To find another child from the past. Wait for someone to accidentally fall through the gate? Or are you proposing to send someone back in time, condemning them to certain death in the primitive world? I propose not to give up on the greatest discovery. This is not a discovery." Markelov slammed his palm on the table. It was a girl, a living child who had parents, a home, friends 2,500 years ago. She lost everything, and I'm not going to turn her victim into a laboratory experiment. Krestovsky opened his mouth, but could not find anything to answer. Sokolov put his hand on the shoulder of the enraged professor. "Everyone is tired. Let's take a break." The funeral passed quietly. Markelov, Sokolov, several students who worked with Anya. The priest read prayers, not realizing that he was burying a child for whom Christianity had not yet been born. On a simple wooden cross, the professor himself burned the words in the girl's tongue, the very last words that she whispered before her death. "What does that mean?" Sokolov asked quietly. "I'm not 100% sure." Markelov looked at the fresh ground. "But approximately. Let them remember. Or don't forget." Something like that. They stood in silence for a moment. A cold November wind drove fallen leaves through the cemetery. Crows were croaking somewhere. "Professor," Sokolov said after a pause, "have you been able to decipher her language?" "Partially. Basic grammar, a few hundred words. Not enough to consider the language fully deciphered, but enough to understand the general meaning." Markelov rubbed his face wearily. "I'll publish the article, anonymously, without mentioning where the informant came from. I will say that I found new artifacts. This will be my way of keeping her people in history." "And what about the gates? With a stone circle?" "I asked an archaeologist friend to register this territory as a protected archaeological site. Access to it will be closed. No experiments, no attempts to activate the gate. Some doors should remain closed." Sokolov nodded. "You're probably right. They left the cemetery at dusk. Markelov turned around for the last time, looked at a small mound of fresh earth, at a wooden cross with strange symbols. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry we couldn't save you." The wind brought only the rustle of leaves in response. A month passed. Markelov immersed himself in working on the article, trying to systematize everything he learned from Anya. Sokolov returned to his usual hospital routine. Krestovsky and his team closed the project due to a lack of material for research. Life went on, as always. But sometimes in the middle of the night, Markelov woke up from a strange sensation. It seemed to him that he heard a voice, a child's voice, singing an ancient lullaby in a forgotten language. He turned on the light, looked at the empty apartment, and the sound disappeared. Just a dream, just an echo of memory. Or not. One day in December, when the first snow covered Moscow with a white cover, Markelov returned to Anya's grave. He brought flowers, although he knew that for her people, the flowers on the graves may not have had any meaning. He stood in silence, looking at the cross, and then I noticed something strange. Next to the grave, in the snow, there were footprints. Small, childish footprints of bare feet. They led from a hill to the edge of the cemetery and disappeared at the old brick wall. Markelov came closer. The tracks were fresh, recent. The snow around them melted slightly, as if from the warmth of a living body. But who could walk barefoot in the snow? What child? The professor followed the tracks to the wall. There they broke off, as if the one who had left them had simply vanished in a thin air, or walked through a wall, or moved to another time. He shook his head, chasing away the mad thoughts. Probably these were the tracks of a dog, or cats. It's easy to make a mistake in the snow. Yes, of course, these were animal tracks. But when he turned to leave, he could have sworn he heard laughter. Quiet, joyful children's laughter, coming from somewhere far away, from beyond the edge of hearing. The laughter of a child who has finally found his way home. Markelov stopped and listened. The wind whistled through the bare branches. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The usual sounds of an ordinary winter evening. He smiled, for the first time in weeks. "Did you get there?" he asked quietly by the void. "I hope I did. May your ancient gods protect you, girl from nowhere." The snow continued to fall, covering the tracks, erasing all the signs. By morning, they were gone, as it has never been, as well as Anya herself, who became only a mysterious footnote in Professor Markelov's scientific article on the Venetian language, published in the spring of the following year. The article caused a stir in academic circles. Where did Markelov get so much new material? Where did he find artifacts with such a volume of text? The professor laughed it off, referring to private collections, to accidental finds. No one dug deeper. In the end, the material was genuine, the research was of high quality. The rest was unimportant. Only Sokolov knew the truth. And once, meeting with Markelov at a conference, he quietly asked, "Do you still think about her?" "Every day," the professor answered honestly. "Every single day. Sometimes it seems to me that it was all a dream, that there was no girl, no gates, no time travel. Just a sick child with a mental disorder who imitated a non-existent language. But you don't believe it." "No, I don't. I saw her eyes, doctor. They had the wisdom of the ages. There was truth in them." They fell silent, each immersed in his own thoughts. "Do you know what's the worst thing?" Markelov continued. "She wasn't alone. Her people sent others through the gate. Chosen, as she called them. Children, teenagers, adults, sent to the future to preserve knowledge. Where are they all? What happened to them? Maybe they were able to adapt. Maybe they learned the local languages, dissolved in the population. Or they just died like Anya. 2,500 years is a lot of time. They could get into any era, or they still come. Markelov looked out the window of the conference hall at the streets of modern Moscow. Maybe right now there's a kid from the past wandering around somewhere who doesn't know his name, who speaks a language that no one understands. Maybe there are dozens, hundreds of them scattered throughout the history of mankind, and no one knows who they really are. Sokolov shivered. A terrible thought. Yes, and beautiful at the same time, because it means that the past does not die, that people who lived thousands of years ago are still with us. Their voices, their songs, their memory, all this lives on as long as we remember. The Aravel, Sokolov said, uncertainly pronouncing someone else's words. Venetic, Markelov. Let them remember. The conference is over. People have left. Life went on. Somewhere in the suburbs, in a protected forest, ancient stones lay in their circle, keeping the secrets of forgotten technologies. Somewhere in a Moscow cemetery, under a simple cross, rested a girl whose real name no one will ever know. Somewhere, perhaps, another child from another time was taking his first steps in an alien world, singing songs that are thousands of years old. And Professor Ilya Davidovich Markelov sat in his office, surrounded by books and manuscripts, and wrote. He wrote a dictionary of a dead language, a grammar of a forgotten culture, the history of a people who disappeared from the world 2,500 years ago. He wrote to be remembered, so that they do not forget. Because as long as there is at least one book, at least one article, at least one record about the Venetic and their amazing knowledge, they are alive. As long as the professor remembers the frightened girl's brown eyes and her last words, she is alive. Memory is the only true immortality. And when, years later, Markelov's students asked where he got such a passion for studying this little-known people, he only smiled and answered, "Once upon a time, I met a girl who taught me their language. Only for 2 weeks. But it was enough to change my whole life." What was her name? I don't know. The professor answered honestly. She didn't remember. But for me, she will forever remain a girl from nowhere. A child who has overcome millennia to bring to us the voice of the past. The students nodded, not fully understanding. They thought it was a metaphor, a beautiful simile. They didn't know the truth, and maybe it was better this way. Some stories need no proof. Some miracles must remain a mystery. And somewhere in the forest near Moscow, on a frosty winter night, ancient stones quietly glowed with a bluish light, just a little, barely noticeable. The gates slumbered, but they were not dead. They waited. Maybe the next traveler. Maybe the one who will find a way to open them correctly. Maybe just the dawn of a new era, when humanity will again be ready to accept the knowledge of the ancestors. Time will tell. Time always has answers. You just need to be able to listen.